We will start with tariffs. Now, as Keir Starmer tweets about Passover and Rachel Reeves sends out messages about Doncaster Airport, there is a rather bigger economic picture taking shape, and Mark's going to take the lead for us today on that. Over to you, Mark.
Good day, everyone. After last week's spirited discussion on tariffs, naturally, since I've covered Congress a lot of years, I had to look to Congress. And as we'll see here, on the very day, April 2nd, that President Trump gave his Rose Garden speech about emphasizing tariffs, a declaration of economic independence, that very day, there was a vote in the Senate, and The Hill reported on it. 4 Republican senators vote with Democrats to undo Trump tariffs on Canada. The thing is, as is often the case with the media cartel, their headlines don't always match the stories, because as I noted on this slide, what it actually said in the body of the story is that in a 51-48 vote, the Senate expressed its sense that it will disagree with Trump's tariffs on Canada, but the vote was on a resolution that does not have the force of law and is just symbolic. Now, of course, I didn't stop looking there. The Senator Charles Grassley, a very noted veteran senator from Iowa, the very next day, April 3rd, they issued a press release, he and Maria Cantwell out of Washington State. And as I expected, Congress is trying to throw its weight around and regain its constitutional authority on trade. And indeed, as it states here, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the Constitution delegates to Congress the power, quote, to regulate commerce with foreign nations among the states, so that's internal and external, and with the Indian tribes. So Senators Grassley and Maria Cantwell have introduced legislation, quote, to restore Congress's constitutionally authorized role in setting and approving U.S. trade policy according to their joint news release. Now, a quick footnote here is that Congress has long had this power, and as is the case with the border, Congress is often making new laws when they don't have to. They have existing constitutional authority and existing laws in most cases, and they simply need to enforce or assert those things. And instead, they spend a lot of time burning up a lot of time carrying out onerous and often tedious legislation. That being said, Chuck Grassley had this to say around the time of that press release: for too long, Congress has delegated its clear authority to regulate interstate and foreign commerce to the executive branch. Building on my previous efforts as Finance Committee Chairman, I'm joining Senator Cantwell to introduce this bipartisan Trade Review Act of 2025. That's the actual name of the bill, to reassert Congress's constitutional role. That's a U.S. Senate photo. Pretty much everything I'm reporting today is firsthand and has not been in the regular news feed except for that Hill item. Anyway, here's the basic thrust of that bill, and we'll be keeping an eye on it to see if it passes. To enact a new tariff, the president must notify Congress of the imposition of a new or the increase of an existing tariff within 48 hours and explain his reasoning. The president also must provide an analysis of the potential impact on American businesses and consumers of these tariffs. Within 60 days, Congress must pass a joint resolution of approval on the new tariff. Otherwise, all new tariffs on imports expire after that deadline. And the fourth main plank here is Congress could end tariffs at any time by passing a disapproval resolution, although anti-dumping measures would get special consideration, such as when China over the decades has occasionally dumped hardwoods, lithium batteries, toys, steel, chemicals, things like that. There might be exceptions there. Moving forward, of course, the oldest committee in the U.S. Congress is the Ways and Means Committee, created in July of 1789, and they still exist. Who knew, right? Anyway, the full committee hearing on the Trump administration's 2025 trade policy agenda was held this past Wednesday. I covered it virtually online, and I only used the Ways and Committee's own broadcast, not any other news broadcast. And the only witness, the only one to testify, was U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Jamieson Greer. I believe that's Jamieson Greer. At any rate, the meeting went on, and it had your typical bipartisan split in it, as this next slide kind of illustrates. The Party number one was mainly represented by Chairman Jason Smith of Missouri, the Republican, and party number two, door number two, ranking member Richard Neal, a Democrat out of Massachusetts. And they had your typical binary arguments, your typical Republican arguments, your typical Democrat arguments. And a quick observation there is that the absence of independent parties or non-affiliated candidates or non-affiliated members of Congress, that is very, very clear when it comes to these rather divisive issues, because you never get anybody refereeing what's going on. It's just your typical Democrat, typical Republican. If you had a Jim Traficant, at least someone independently minded, even though he was a Democrat, or you had actual numerous third-party candidates elected to office, you could get more nuance, you could get more objectivity, but you often don't get that with the media only focusing on your typical Democrat Republican arguments. But anyway, we have some two quick video clips that are pretty far apart from one another, but it gives the range of views that were talked about from the Democrat side and the Republican side. So let's see those video clips.
Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to show a slide to everybody documenting where we are with the United States and the U.S. trade deficit. I think this really shows why this is an emergency. If you look at where we are with manufacturing goods, that's in the red column here. If you look at what has happened to the manufacturing capacity of the United States, we have plummeted, absolutely plummeted down. Here in 2022, we have such a trade deficit with manufactured goods. This is critical. This is why the president has said this is an emergency. The same thing with fuels and other total goods. We have plummeted in this nation's capacity to actually produce things. So yes, this is an emergency, and this is by all means altogether the right thing to do. If we do not reverse this trend, again, going with the absolute calamitous effect of how we are hurtling towards a sovereign debt crisis, this nation does not exist. And yes, there is short-term problems, without a doubt. But it's the same thing by taking medicine you don't want to take. If we don't help the body by intervening and doing what is critically important for this nation, nothing else matters. So this is why how manufacturing has plummeted, and this is why we are in a state of emergency. Thank you.
Quick footnote, that's Representative Greg Murphy out of North Carolina, Republican. A quick footnote is I contacted his office and I tried to get that graphic so we could get a closer, clearer look at it, and I did not get a response yet. Anyway, we have a Representative Chu, CHU, out of California, a Democrat, giving the opposing view, and that's the next video.
They are barely able to afford their everyday living expenses, but now they're hearing that the average family will have to pay $4,600 a year more because of the Trump tariffs. They are hearing this will be the largest tax increase for the American people in our nation's peacetime history. They are hearing Goldman Sachs say that we face a recession. The increases will be for food items that the U.S. does not produce domestically, like cacao beans, coffee beans, tea and spices, and certain nuts. But non-food items like clothing, consumer electronics, shoes, cell phones, furniture, and household appliances will be especially hard hit, as more than 50% of our consumption comes from countries facing tariff increases of 30% or more. I must point out that there are some items on the list like bananas and cacao beans, which the U.S. can never grow enough of to meet our own demand because of our mostly non-tropical climate. In fact, the U.S. produces a tiny number of bananas in Hawaii and Florida, but depends enormously on importing bananas from Guatemala, Ecuador, and Costa Rica, all of which receive tariffs. And in fact, the U.S. is the world's largest importer of bananas. So this shoot first, then aim approach is making Americans' lives much worse with no actual plan and doesn't make any sense.
So that's the opposing view on that. Interesting stuff. Now, an interesting twist, and she alluded to food, is that we need to make a distinction between perishable and non-perishable goods. In fact, it might make sense for the U.S. to be striving for self-sufficiency more in the food area than durable goods because food can spoil or become contaminated. There's only so much shelf life, and your supply chains might have to be dealt with differently. Now, we have a miscellaneous item here. The shrimping industry in the U.S., however, is cheering the proposed legislation and cheering the Trump tariffs. They like what they see. And this is out of MyRGV.com. It happens to concern the port of Brownsville, where they harvest enormous amounts of shrimp about an hour east of where I'm sitting. And there's another bill in Congress, as this alludes to, House Resolution 2071, the Save Our Shrimpers Act, has been introduced there to prohibit federal funding from going to international financial firms that finance foreign shrimp farms. The Rio Grande Valley, that's deep South Texas, the shrimp industry here, and the rest of the domestic industry, hopes that resolution becomes law. Quote, in light of the fact that U.S. shrimpers have been brought to their knees by unrelenting waves of cheap foreign exports flooding the market and driving prices down past the point of sustainability. And we have one more item on this. It's a hard thing to police, we're hearing. The U.S. International Trade Commission found last year that imported farm-raised shrimp is ultra cheap because, quote, other countries are subsidizing their fisheries and dumping their product on the U.S. market, end quote, according to that trade commission. So that's it for now, gentlemen. I have a little bit later on state-level trade that adds another interesting twist to this that no one ever thinks about. But now over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. And supply chains will be something we'll come back to presently, but obviously this is a very big topic, so we're going to extend this theme. So Patrick's going to continue with the tariff story.